My name is Shigeki Goto. I'm from APAN50. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from Tokyo. Tajahao. I'm very pleased to introduce the keynote speaker for this session, an old friend and colleague who is also one of the founders of APAN, Michael McRobbie. Michael is one of the longest serving current presidents of a major American research university, having been president of Indiana University, IU, since 2007. A native of Australia, he earned his PhD from the Australian National University, where he also had a distinguished career as an administrator and a researcher in many areas of information technology and logic. Michael moved to the United States in 1997 as Indiana University's first vice president for information technology and CIO. He later served as IU's vice president for research and provost and vice president for academic affairs. At Indiana University, he is also a professor of computer science and of philosophy with numerous publications and books. Under his leadership, Indiana University, IU, has been record growth in external research funding, construction, student quality, diversity, international engagement, and private fundraising through IU's $3 billion bicentennial campaign, as well as a comprehensive academic restructuring of the university. He holds or has held many senior positions in higher education in the United States, and he is presently chair of the Association of American Universities, the top 65 research universities in North America. He is also past chair of the Big Ten Conference and Internet 2. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the Council for Foreign Relations. He has 6 honorary degrees, including from Soong Kyung Kwan University in South Korea and the Australian National University, as well as many other awards and honors. Now I am pleased to present our keynote speaker, Michael McRobbie, please.
Wonderful. All right. So thank you very much, Professor Goto, for that kind introduction. Goto-san is an old friend who I've known many years and who was a central part of the very first meetings and discussions that led to the establishment of APAN. He's had a long and distinguished career at Waseda University, and he continues to serve as an advisor to the APAN Board of Directors. In fact, a few years ago, Goto-san was deservedly inducted into the Internet Hall of Fame. So I'm very pleased to take part virtually in this major historical milestone for APAN, the 50th APAN meeting, and the first to be held as a conference attended, as I understand it, by around 1,000 people from over 50 countries. I know that many old friends and colleagues are with us, and I'm delighted that 2 of the other key founders of APAN, Professor Kilnam Chon and Mr. Kazunori Konishi, are with us possibly as well. And I want to thank Dr. Louisa Lam, the director of the Joint Universities Computing Center in Hong Kong and the chair of the local organizing committee, and also thank my former colleague Marcus Buchon, the general manager of APAN, for their kind invitation to speak. And let me take this opportunity to also congratulate, on behalf of Indiana University, the Joint Universities Computing Center on its 50th anniversary. Such anniversaries are very important and symbolic in the history of an institution, as we are particularly aware at Indiana University as we conclude a year-long celebration of our 200th anniversary. So I congratulate JUCC for its long history of interinstitutional collaboration and its role in the development of information technology in the Hong Kong higher education community. I'm very proud to be one of the original founders of APAN and to have been a member of the global IT community for many years, both when I was in Australia and then in the United States as CIO at Indiana University. During this time, I worked on many issues in IT and networking with people from all over the world. And like many of you, I had a certain perspective on these issues and their importance, but this was necessarily bounded by what were, relatively speaking, responsibilities focused in just one area of a much larger enterprise of the entire university. But in 2007, I became president of one of America's largest research universities with a budget now approaching $4 billion, nearly 100,000 students and 40,000 faculty and staff, as well as a $6 billion hospital system. In this position, my perspective rapidly evolved and broadened. Some of the issues that once seemed of enormous importance that filled me, and I know many other people who have joined us for this conference with passionate intensity, seemed of far less import when one is struggling with huge budget issues caused by government disinvestment in higher education, with damaging government policy changes, with an increasing mood of public skepticism about the value of science and education, with catastrophic potential risk ranging from athletics to infrastructure, and with existential threats to our very existence as institutions, such as the global pandemic that we are now experiencing. These are, of course, more immediate challenges, but from a longer term perspective not even of decades, but of centuries, those of us who lead large research universities must also ensure that all that we do, including in IT and in networking, reflects the three fundamental missions of a university: the creation of knowledge, the dissemination of knowledge, and the preservation of knowledge. So in this address, I hope to address the theme of this conference, the future of network research and education, by addressing some of the issues that I think are of long-term institutional importance and which transcend the daily battles we have to fight in higher education. But first, given the historic nature of this APAN meeting, I want to say just a little about the formation of APAN in 1996 from someone who was quite literally in the room where it happened. My own interest in high-performance networking was very much influenced by the work done in the US Gigabit Testbed Initiative, known as the GTI, which commenced about 1990 and ran for about 5 years. There were 5 testbeds, but the one I believe that was the most suggestive and visionary was CASA, a gigabit testbed that connected Caltech, JPL, San Diego Supercomputer Center, and the Los Alamos National Laboratory. The primary focus of CASA, under the extraordinary leadership of Dr. Paul Messina, was on distributed heterogeneous supercomputer applications involving very large computational problems. As such, it was a very influential forerunner to grid computing and much more. The GTI, in part, led to the establishment of the very high-speed backbone network service known as the VBNS, and indirectly to Internet 2 here in the United States. The GTI, and CASA in particular, influenced the establishment of a new research centre in Australia, of whose board I was a member. It was known as the Research Data Network Cooperative Research Centre, which was focused on an experimental broadband network that Australia's major carrier Telstra had established at that time. 2 of the research projects on that network were in heterogeneous supercomputing. Around the same time, discussions were being carried out between the Australian and Japanese governments. They had risen on 2 occasions, in fact, to the prime ministerial level, on cooperation in high-performance computing that could broadly build on the success of research partnerships between the Australian National University, where I then was, and the Japanese company Fujitsu, in which I was then involved, and which was so ably led for many years by Professor Robin Stanton, who I gather may also be attending this conference. These discussions led ultimately in 1995 to a proposal to establish a direct network connection, essentially to connect high-performance network testbeds in Australia and in Japan. Through these activities, I was invited to give a paper to the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Symposium for Realizing the Information Society Conference. That was its full title. And this was held in Tsukuba, Japan in March of 1996. The paper that I gave was called Towards an Asia Pacific Gigabit Testbed. And in it, I advocated generalizing the model of intercontinental connectivity that we were trying to bring about between Australia and Japan to the broader Asia Pacific regions based on the success of the GTI in the United States. Professor Chon, then at the Department of Computer Science at the Korean Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, also gave a paper at the same meeting called Asian Highway, Why Not a Gigabit Network? And though we had never met at that stage, and nor did we know each other even, our papers were remarkably similar in what we advocated, namely establishing a high-performance Asia-Pacific network. During the meeting, a small group of us, including myself, Professor Chon, Professor Goto, Mr. Kenishi, who was then at KDDI, Dr. Tin Tan Wee from Singapore, and one or two others met in the lobby of the Daiichi Hotel in Tsukuba on the evening of March 27, and agreed to try to establish an initiative to do just this. This initiative proposed the establishment of what we then called the AP testbed, and I drafted the summary of our meeting, which in fact I still have a copy of the original summary. Steve Goldstein, then at the National Science Foundation in the United States, also attended the meeting just to observe. He did, though, inform us that the NSF would be releasing a solicitation for the High Performance International Internet Services program called HIPAS, calling for proposals to establish connections between the then VBNS and comparable networks in other regions of the world. He suggested that this program might be a way of providing a high-speed connection from the Asia Pacific to the United States. In June of the same year, at a meeting in Seoul, Professor Chon and I had agreed to combine and revise our papers into a joint paper that was called Towards an Asia Pacific Advanced Network, which we presented at this meeting, and which was where the name APAN first in fact appeared, I believe. During this forum, we had the first major meeting of the representatives of most of the countries, institutions, and networks that would eventually become the founding partners at APAN. At this meeting, we had a discussion in more detail about what would be APAN's mission. Would it be, and these are my words, more of a coordinating body for regional advanced network activities, or would it be an organization more like, for example, Internet2, that owned and operated its own infrastructure funded by its members that interconnected all of them, as well as providing connectivity to other nations' research networks? But the latter, highly ambitious option was always going to be difficult to accomplish. Remember, this is 1996, as it was an idea well beyond what most funding agencies could in many ways even comprehend at that point. Recognizing this reality, the meeting agreed that APAN's mission would basically become the former option. That is, in fact, as it is described today, to, quote, coordinate and promote network technology developments and advances in network-based applications and services across the Asia-Pacific region, unquote. Soon after this, however, I moved to the United States in early 1997 to become Vice President for Information Technology at IU. And I expected my involvement with APAN to come to an end. But in the spring of 1997, the NSF released the HIPAS solicitation that Steve Goldstein had mentioned to us in Tsukuba. I met with Professor Chon, Professor Goto, Mr. Kenishi, and others in Tokyo in June of 1997. We agreed to partner on a joint HIPAS proposal called Transpact, a high-performance network connection for research and education between the VBNS and the Asia-Pacific Advanced Network, APAN, unquote. That was the full title of the proposal. And I was nominated as the principal investigator on this proposal. This was funded by the National Science Foundation in 1998 for over $12 million, and substantial additional resources were committed by KDDI and others. Transpact commenced on July 30, 1998, and was initially a 35 megabit connection. Today, it comprises over 120 gigabits of connectivity. Transpact 2 commenced in August of 2005, and as I had taken on additional administrative responsibilities at IU as Vice President for Research as well, I asked Jim Williams to take over from me as PI, where he did a superb job until his retirement about 7 years ago. Since then, many others have continued this outstanding work, including Steve Wallace, who was involved from the outset. And for the last 7 years, Dr. Jennifer Schopf, who now serves as Director of International Networks at IU. I think it's fair to say that the credibility that this NSF HIPAS award, original award, gave to the whole idea of international connectivity helps significantly with the growth of APAN, and the NSF deserves great credit for this program. Later, in 1998, IU was awarded the contract to build, manage, and operate the Internet 2 network, then called Abilene. And in 2000, we formally established the Global Network Operations Center, which of course is called the Global NOC, to manage Transpac, a number of other international networks funded under the HIPAS program, and what was then called Abilene. Today, it is, I think, in many ways, the premier NOC in the world for advanced research and education networks. It manages 21 major national and international networks, employs over 130 network engineers, all employed with external funding, and also associated technical staff, and has 10 graduate students working on various projects associated with the global NOC. Transpac 3 was funded in June of 2010, along with the America Connects to Europe, known as ACE project, also led by IU. ACE has had an important role in the discovery of the Higgs boson in 2012 by providing the massive data bandwidth to move the huge amounts of data from the Large Hadron Collider to those centers in the US that were carrying out analysis in speeding collaboration and discovery. Both of these projects were funded again in the next phase of the NSF's IRNC awards in March of 2015, with ACE being replaced by the Networks for European, American, and African Research, known as the NEAR project. Both of these projects provided expanded capacity and services to support high-capacity networks and the ever-increasing digital needs of international research collaborations. They also addressed redundancy and resiliency in a globally coordinated fashion, and how high-performance networks could be used more effectively. IU has recently entered negotiations with the National Science Foundation on the follow-on projects to our work in both Europe and Asia as part of the continuing NSF IRNC program, and we hope to be able to make some announcements in this area in the very near future. If approved, these projects will allow us to continue our work in Asia through what has now become Transpac 5, and in Europe and Africa with an expansion to the Arctic through the Networks for European, American, African, and Arctic Research Project. We're calling this Near Next. So just as Transpac 4 extended the Transpac 3 collaborations to formally include the APAN and TEIN partners, Transpac 5 would build on these and on the significant work of the Asia-Pacific Ring collaboration, of which IU was a founding member 2 years ago. Transpac 5 would extend our multilateral agreements to potentially double the capacity and resilience of the Asia-Pacific Ring circuits, and offer significantly more focus on supporting extended network experimentation and production research support. So this is just a brief overview of the numerous global initiatives in high-performance international networking, collectively representing an investment of hundreds of millions of dollars that can trace their origins in many cases back to the enormous success of the original APAN Indiana University collaboration that established Transpac, the original Transpac. I think it's no exaggeration to say that without this collaboration and the role that APAN played in it, it is unlikely that global high-performance research and education networking would be as advanced or as inclusive as it is today. APAN has gone on to become a very important and an energetic catalyst and coordinator for the development of regional clusters of national research and education network interconnections in the Asia-Pacific region, and for the interconnection of the region to other parts of the world. APAN now includes 17 primary members, with a number of additional primary members to potentially join the organization soon, and with a number of additional affiliate, associate, and liaison members, and a dozen MOU members. It has also supported initiatives in fields that include bioinformatics, medical informatics, distributed computing, telemanufacturing, remote robotic control, digital libraries, wide area parallel computing, astronomy, and high energy physics. There will be, I know, many talks at this conference about all that APAN has achieved and is achieving. Finally, let me say, as one of the original founders, that APAN and its leaders really are to be congratulated for all of their outstanding accomplishments over nearly 25 years. Internationally based collaboration in science, research, and education in the whole Asia-Pacific region really do owe all of you a great debt. So now let me return to a point I mentioned earlier. From a long-term point of view, universities have three fundamental missions. The creation of knowledge, as I said, which is research and innovation. The dissemination of knowledge, which is education and learning. And the preservation of knowledge, which broadly speaking can be thought of as being information repositories of both physical and digital objects. So where do global high-performance networks fit in here? And I would argue that they are fundamental in every one of these areas. Let me start with the research. Research has become completely international in character. In the academy, scholarship and research in just about every discipline, from anthropology to zoology, is truly international. A process hugely accelerated, of course, by the internet. There is in general no such thing as American anthropology or Chinese zoology, just anthropology and zoology, though there may be contending schools of theory and analysis within these disciplines. This scholarship and research takes place within a global research or scholarly environment where it is, in general, facts and reason that determine progress, not national origin. Hence, the quality of the programs and research at universities is determined by the quality of the faculty and students who contribute to them, and they can come from anywhere in the world. And fundamental to research, especially in the sciences, is collaboration, whether it be co-authors on opposite sides of the world, or a group of thousands of researchers from dozens of countries working with major experimental facilities located around the globe. It is also no exaggeration to say that this research in science is becoming almost totally digital. Data is being generated, collected, processed, analyzed, visualized, and stored in digital form. Simulations and modeling are being carried out completely digitally, and the historical and contemporary archives of science, certainly the main material, have been converted fully into digital form. In this context, then, it is the high-performance networks that enable this massive global scientific enterprise to move forward and make progress by ensuring that the speed with which huge volumes of digital data can be moved between researchers and institutions is not a limiting factor to the boldest, most adventurous and advanced scientific experiments and collaborations that can lead to discoveries and scientific breakthroughs with sometimes profound implications for humanity. The most pressing challenges we face are also international in character. When it comes to climate change, for example, no one center or group can collect all the data needed for climate models and predictions. International collaborations are an absolute necessity. The same is true for the COVID-19 pandemic, global pandemic. At IU, our international networks team has been focusing over the last several months on trying to improve performance from COVID-related data sources in Asia and Europe for collaborators in the United States. And Jennifer Schopf, the Director of International Networks at IU, will speak more about this work later this week. So just as research has become completely international in character, it is true in many ways of education, with many degrees now requiring some international component, with the rise of global collaborative courseware platforms, with instruction becoming multilateral and virtual, and with all of this fueled in part by ubiquitous, very high quality video conferencing and telepresence technologies. As with research, students can also require, in some cases, require rapid access to online scientific instruments and data that are available to them. As well, until the pandemic at least, we continue to see growth in the number of students in the United States studying overseas. And this is true of many other countries. Nearly a third of the students on our IU Bloomington campus have studied abroad by the time that they graduate. And that is a very large number because we have a very large student body on this camp, on the particular campus I'm talking about. Such international literacy as part of a student's degree has in fact become a very desirable qualification for many employers in many fields. In support of the international aspects of education, many universities have also established campuses and facilities all over the world, and they rely on high-quality video conferencing technologies and other advanced communications technologies to continue to closely interact with their home campuses and others. This becomes even more crucial when travel is dramatically curtailed, as it is at the moment with the pandemic. Of the three missions of universities, the preservation of knowledge, the third of these that I mentioned, is the one that is not as glamorous as the first two, but it is equally as important. For the great collections that many of our research universities have are a vital part of the cultural, scientific, and historical records of the human race, and can be among an institution's most precious resources. Increasingly, though, the key to the preservation of these resources is through their digitization, to allow both their long-term digital preservation or where the long-term survival of the original is at serious risk. One is only to recall the recent tragedies and the incalculable losses caused by the devastating fires at Universal Studios, the National Museum of Brazil, and the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris to fully understand the importance of this point. At IU, we have launched a major effort in recent years to systematically survey and document all of our major collections. We have over 200. And then to build on our early work in digitizing books and documents, to digitize first all of our time-based media objects. And this will involve digitizing over 300,000 audio and video recordings, many in formats no longer supported, and over 25,000 films from what is regarded as one of the finest film collections in the United States. This project we call the Media Digitization and Preservation Initiative, and in fact, it'll be complete next year, but the 300,000 audio and video recordings are basically complete already, and many of them are now accessible through various facilities in the university. We're now beginning to tackle what we think of as the final frontier in digital preservation. And this is the comprehensive digitization of three-dimensional objects. Here, we have a number of flagship projects, including the digitization of large segments of our paleontological collections. And we've also carried out a major project with the famous Uffizi Museum in Florence to digitize all of the pieces of their Greco-Roman collection, about 1250, as a precursor to our own efforts in this area. Finally, of course, are the truly massive amounts of born digital data produced by an enormous range of systems and experiments, from the smallest lab to the largest particle accelerators, telescopes, or sensor webs. All of this data needs to be seen as part of the overall digital collections and holdings of an institution. So in addition to our goal of preserving all of these digital objects and digital data, we also have the goal of providing widespread access to them for our students, researchers, scholars, and in many cases, the general public. And this is where high-performance networks come in, enabling fast access in a routine manner to massive amounts of digitized data represented by digitized preserved objects in these collections. So given all of this, it is essential that faculty, students, and staff have available to them the infrastructure that will allow them to work at the most sophisticated level and to collaborate effectively with colleagues worldwide. It is impossible to imagine a university or college of any size operating effectively today without it. And during this time when researchers and students are severely limited in their ability to travel internationally due to the pandemic, I would argue that such infrastructure is more important than ever. Conversely, it should be by now unacceptable for this infrastructure to be run at anything but the highest production standards, as we have come to expect of our national research and education networks, and in the best engineered and best operated ways. However, global networking that is the global interconnection of NRENs, has been accomplished overall in many ways, in ad hoc ways, in spite of the best efforts of organizations like APAN and their local successors. There is, on the one hand, over-provisioning in some places caused by local issues of reliability. And until recently, the global interconnecting fabric was overall not architected for redundancy or reliability, though over the last 5 years, improving the situation has been a major focus of the international networking community, especially within the APAN community. The Asia-Pacific Ring collaboration I mentioned before between the United States and Asia is a major effort in this regard, just as the advanced network architecture collaboration between the United States and the European Union is for transatlantic collaboration. On the other hand, there is a lack of connectivity to some parts of the world due to insufficient government funding and unreasonable pricing by commercial entities. As one recent National Science Foundation publication states, not all communities are connected sufficiently, and those communities often lack the training, relationships, and resources to complete the end-to-end linkages required for full participation in science in the 21st century scientific R&E enterprise. A major challenge at the present in the APAN region is in connecting and better supporting the growing economies in countries in the ASEAN region like Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and more adequately connecting even India or Pakistan, certainly to those of us in the United States and elsewhere. Similar challenges remain for Africa and Latin America. So while the dedicated efforts of scores of leaders of national research and education networks have created a global fabric that has met the first generation needs of research and education, its new second generation demands will require a significantly more systematic and intentional approach to the architecture of global infrastructure, an infrastructure that will need to provide a consistent and seamless advanced set of services born from a fully integrated set of components. Surmounting these challenges will require innovative approaches to the way these efforts are organized and funded. Achieving these goals will also require the involvement of the key higher education and research organizations in the relevant countries, the key funding agencies in these countries, such as the NSF and the NIH in the United States, and other key government and, where possible, multilateral organizations. For international research and education networks are now part of the fundamental fabric, not only of research and education within countries, but as part of the global fabric of research and education. Let me conclude with some comments about the coronavirus global pandemic. This pandemic, of course, represents the gravest public health challenge that the world has faced in a century. Here in the United States, we continue to see the number of cases increase. And in the spring, most states instituted some form of lockdown, but many states eased their lockdowns too soon without mask requirements or adequate attention to physical distancing. And so the pandemic continues to shake the foundations of universities all over the world. The rapid pace with which it has developed has really been staggering. The unpredictability of events has made an orderly pattern of planning and response impossible. Revenues have plummeted, teaching and research have been disrupted, and international programs have been severely affected. At IU, like most other American universities, we had to respond extremely quickly in these very difficult circumstances. And we sent all of our students, that's nearly 100,000 students, home in March. And we transitioned to all virtual instruction after a 2-week break. This was a massive undertaking in an institution, as I mentioned, with 100,000 students and nearly 40,000 faculty and staff. However, it went remarkably smoothly with few issues of any kind, even though it was an enormous and unprecedented undertaking. We became an institution where Zoom and other video conferencing and collaborative tools became the dominant tools for instruction. To date, for example, we have seen 240 million Zoom minutes, about 450 Zoom years, over 1.1 million Zoom meetings involving about 5.3 million participants, and we've seen nearly 15 million Canvas sessions. Many of our researchers too had to transition to these and other IT tools to continue their research. This resulted in a huge increase in the load on our campus local and regional networks, but they handled them with ease, as did the national networks and the global networking fabric. Indiana University has invested heavily in its IT infrastructure, including extensively in its high-performance networks over more than 20 years, and never has the value of this investment been better demonstrated or vindicated than over the last 5 months of primarily virtual operations. And never has the value of the investments that have been made in national research networks in the United States, and I'm sure in other countries like those in APAN, been better demonstrated, as the global virtual research and education enterprise barely missed a beat and became the principal vehicle for scientific and research collaborations. Extremely important to us as well were the investments we had made over 10 years in online education through our highly ranked IU Online program, where we had many years of success upon which we were able to draw. We transitioned to all online instruction against a background where over a third of our students had been doing at least one online course every year. It simply cannot be overstated how important this investment was in preparing IU to meet the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. We plan to begin our fall semester soon with a mixture of in-person and online instruction with strict medical and public health safety measures in place. But if we face further difficulties in the months ahead, we know we can return to all online instruction with great confidence. We will, though, have to continue to operate in this climate of radical uncertainty until effective vaccines or therapeutics or the development of effective vaccines or therapeutics that can dramatically reduce mortality. So let me conclude by saying again what an honor it is to have been invited to give this keynote address to an organization that I'm very proud to have played a very small part in founding nearly 25 years ago. The Asia Pacific faces many challenges in the years ahead, but the spirit of cooperation and collaboration that APAN has so successfully demonstrated since its founding is an excellent example of a positive way ahead. My congratulations to all my old friends who are still among the stalwarts of APAN, and to all the many others who have made it such a success over the years. And finally, congratulations to APAN on your 50th conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Quite informative and thoughtful comments. And so far, we accept some questions. However, it's all answered. So, any questions from the floor using Q&A of Zoom webinar? Or panelists for the next session can speak out if you wish. Any questions or comments, suggestions?
I have one question. Thank you very much, Professor McRobbie. That was a terrific perspective on the history of APAN and on your personal contribution to the environment. And I don't think anybody accepts your understated contribution. My question relates to the issue of how we deal with the volume of data. The kinds of policies that we're seeing where governments are archiving data and setting up archive mechanisms, and the impossibility of that, the impossibility of dealing with those volumes. So it's the question of how do we develop mechanisms that will allow us to decide what needs to be kept and what does not need to be kept, because it really is an infinite volume. Do you have perspectives on that? Do you have strategies around that? And what kind of strategies did you apply at IU?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. We've obviously been involved in various initiatives in the US to digitize books and papers and so on, and that really, in a sense, is a solved problem and fairly easy. When it came to digitizing audio and video and film, audio and video we did first. So, so-called time-based data. We had a lot of it. We have one of the largest holdings of such material in the US for all kinds of reasons. And so the question was exactly the question you raised. How does one determine what should be digitized and stored and what shouldn't? And the way we solved that was simply to put together a committee of experts in all the relevant fields. From memory, this is now 5 years ago or so that we did this. There were about 15, 16 people from areas like folklore and anthropology and other areas in the humanities, through the arts and so on. And they basically made the decisions and had to provide a justification why it was worth keeping. But that 300,000, just over 300,000 odd objects, became the material in a vast array of different formats. Many of them with playback mechanisms that no longer obtainable. As we always say, people always think it's a joke, but it's actually true. Our main source for equipment was eBay, picking up the multiple copies of old machines that we could then cannibalize to make new machines to play some of this material back before it was digitalized. So that's how we did it, and that's how we're doing it now with the three-dimensional material, which is even harder to decide what to do, and we're frankly only just starting on that. It raises all kinds of interesting issues. I do think that in the United States, there's still not maybe as comprehensive a realization among the funding agencies about the importance of long-term digital preservation. We started an initiative that really, unfortunately, wasn't that successful 4 or 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, called the Digital Preservation Network, that was focused on long-term digital preservation. I think the ideas were right, but it's not as exciting as various other issues. And when you're talking about the issues involved in storing digital data for 100 years or 200 years, people's eyes tend to glaze over. But when so much of the data that you now have and the material you now have only exists in digital form, then how is one to think about storing that material over the same length of time that one is storing documents that go back to Roman and Egyptian times in this country, and I'm sure documents of comparable age in other civilizations as well. And I think that we're only at the very beginning of trying to understand how one can do that in a systematic way. Obviously, networks, high-performance networks, are going to play a major role in that, but so is going to be standards of curation that are probably far higher than we see in many data archives outside of major libraries and other facilities at the moment. I think you're muted, Andrew.
Sorry, we've got a couple of questions from the floor. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing NRENs today?
I think basically continuing to make the case as to why they are necessary in the face of rapid developments at the commercial level. This is a debate we've had for 20 years in the Internet 2 community. I mean, I'm not as involved as I was some years ago, but about at what point can the commercial networks offer everything that the high performance networks can, or the NRENs can offer. I don't think that's the case at the moment, and I think there are some specific issues that make the need for NRENs very necessary. But I think I don't think people should ever relax about that and continually need to re-justify and make that case. Costs are coming down in some ways, but they're going up in others. It's never going to be a cheap area in which to work.
Thank you very much. We have another question from Dr. Saeed, Facility Department of MBA, Hospital Administration, Achara Nagarjara University. Thank you for an excellent presentation. You will give an excellent presentation on this present situation. Thank you all. If anybody else has other questions, could you please put them on the Q&A and we'll present them to Professor McRobbie.
Hello, Professor. I'm Jilong Wang from Shanghai, China.
How do you do?
Yeah. Thank you very much for your exciting presentation. My question is because, currently the COVID-19 epidemic influences the education very much. And currently people get used to study and working online. So how do you think the development of online education? I wonder if there will be a totally online virtual university appeared, and how could they affect the traditional university education? Thank you.
Well, Professor Wang, I freely admit I am a skeptic about the idea of totally online education. We have seen with our students, in particular with our undergraduate students, that they very much want to return to the in-person education experience. For young people, there have been studies that have been done, young people in particular, have been studies that have been done that show that somewhere like 50% of what a student learns, an undergraduate student learns, they learn from interacting with fellow students and others outside of the classroom. So when you go all online, you cut them off from that kind of interaction, and you also cut them off from the social importance of being in a university environment with other students and access to certain kinds of physical facilities too, which are very hard to duplicate online. I've given a number of papers on this, expressing my skepticism about the fad of totally online education. I do believe in a mixed model. We've had a very successful program in online education. As I said, at least for all of our students, they're doing at least one online course a year because they find this very convenient to work around the rest of their curriculum. Now, it is the case for graduate study, master's level degrees, that you're then dealing with students who already have their first degree, many of whom might be working, and for whom a completely online degree, or basically mainly online degree, is exactly the right solution. And we certainly, at least at this university, we certainly believe in the importance of online education at the graduate level, but we don't see it replacing undergraduate education, but we do see it complementing and enhancing undergraduate education.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I agree. Because when we get old, we need a campus to meet. Thank you very much.
That's right.
We have another question from the floor, from Arif. What about data security, as all the big countries like the USA and China like to get inside our machines, and since we are mostly running on the cloud because of COVID-19, they have full access to our data. And I think it would be a way to get full access, which was difficulty previously. What's your thinking about this, Professor McRobbie?
Well, I think that data security is obviously a matter that individual institutions have to make decisions about what they regard as being the most appropriate way to address it. If they have data that's sensitive in any way, they need to ensure that this is protected as comprehensively as possible. Obviously, there are going to be concerns with commercial providers of services in this area, but it's going to be a matter of the size and credibility of some of the larger enterprises. This is obviously a very complicated and difficult problem, but people, I think, or institutions do need to carefully address the nature of the data they have, and bearing in mind that universities are in general open institutions, but to take special measures to protect data that they regard as being sensitive or private. Privacy issues are obviously a major concern in this country. I know they're a major concern in Europe and other parts of the world, and there are laws that govern the privacy of data, and I expect we're going to see those only but increase in future years.
Thank you, Professor. I have two questions from the CEO of BD Ren. First of all, thank you for your excellent presentation. Is there any way to turn hands-on activities to transform online, or to conduct a truly acceptable online assessment? And a follow-up, you were also mentioning about using Zoom application. How are you handling this with the present concern of security issues?
We've had, out of the hundreds of thousands of Zoom sessions that we've had almost no security issues at all. And I think that's true of many other institutions. I think the kind of precautions you need to take with respect to security for Zoom sessions are sort of well known. I think people have a lot of experience with them. So I think I think people are reasonably confident that if properly used and configured, Zoom is quite secure, certainly for the kinds of classes that we hold on a regular basis at the university. I didn't catch the rest of the question, Andrew, but maybe that'll do as a response.
I think that pretty much covers it, which kind of segues to a parallel question. What about the development of massive online courses or MOOCs? It seems that adaptive learning and micro-credentials are developing very fast. Do you think MOOCs will become part of the learning, will continue to be part of learning modes going forward?
Well, we call them MOOCs here, but I'm a skeptic. In fact, I'm a huge skeptic. Because MOOCs basically are places where you take some of your best intellectual property, that is the courses given by your best instructors, and make them freely available. This doesn't strike me as a sustainable business model. There have been some MOOCs that have been successful. I think a lot of the steam has gone out of the MOOC bandwagon. And I certainly do not see it as being any kind of a credible replacement for anything other than just a few small areas of high profile, popular and relatively elementary education.
This kind of brings us to a kind of segue question. The US has stopped issuing visas to international students. If the mode of learning is purely online, how does that affect IU? And I'd also maybe throw this out to others who are at universities in the panel. What is the effect? But firstly, over to you, Michael, to start with.
Well, as I understand it, that visas are going to start to be issued again soon. The principal reason that they stopped issuing them was because of the pandemic. But I believe that was going to change fairly soon. How it's going to affect us? It will affect us like all the other major universities in the United States. We're going to see the number of our international students decline significantly. This is very unfortunate, as we've always valued our international students and our international alumni. But I think because of the pandemic and some other reasons, I think we'll see those numbers decline, at least for in the near term. I'm hoping that in the longer term we may see those numbers increase again. But we also have to remember the converse, and I talked about that in my remarks, and that is that we Indiana University are the sixth highest ranked university in the country out of 1,200 who are ranked for the number of our students who study abroad. So roughly a third of our undergraduate graduating class, which is a class of about 8,000 students, has studied overseas by the time they graduate. Most of them have studied for a semester period as well. So this number's doubled since I've been president. This has been one of my top priorities is to build our international engagement through our students from the United States studying abroad. And of course, this is going to be affected too by the pandemic in a multiplicity of different ways. But this is no different to what all the other big major universities in the United States are seeing.
And we've got one final question from the floor from Professor Francis Lee. The digital divide has become bigger due to COVID-19. COVID has bigger impact. Does COVID have a bigger impact in less developed countries than some of the more developed countries?
Well, I'm not an epidemiologist or a virologist, but I think the full impact of the coronavirus pandemic is probably yet to be seen. Some countries that almost completely escaped its impact early on seem to now be dealing with it. I'm very surprised that Australia, which did such a great job, seems to be in the early days seems to now be dealing with a recurrence of it in the state of my birth, Victoria. I think I read today that I think Mexico has the third largest number of cases in Mexico. It first started off with very few. So what the impact of COVID is going to be is, I think is probably a long way from being completed yet. And sadly, I think it's going to continue to get probably worse before it gets better, globally speaking. Obviously, what everybody's hoping is for a vaccine. There are multiple different projects going on. We track all this stuff very closely. And then, of course, there's a lot of work going on with therapeutics, and the hope is that as more and better therapeutics get developed, that this will mitigate mortality and change the whole way that this disease is viewed as well.
Thank you very much for answering those questions. Back over to Goto Sensei.
Oh, actually, we have one question left high level. Due to the time management of the session, then I'll just forward the real final question to Michael, and hopefully we will get his answer later. Because of the time management, just hand over to Gerrit, who will chair the panel discussion next. So thank you very much, Michael. Quite informative and impressive talk. And we are very proud to having you as a founder of APAN. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gora-san. Good to see you again, as always. Goodbye. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you, Professor McRobbie. Wonderful.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.